A Song for Silas by Lori Wick. Chapter 3. Barely finishing a piece of pie and cup of coffee, Silas began answering questions. Luke and Christine wanted to know everything. Their first questions were about Paul, the youngest brother in the Cameron family, who was at seminary in Chicago. Silas, understanding their concern for the brother they missed so much and saw so little of, started right in. Paul is great. He misses everyone but loves school. He fills a different pulpit in the area nearly every week. He also told me that as much as he loves his studies, there is no feeling in the world like that of preaching a sermon. I couldn't believe how excited he was. Do you think he'll take a church in the Chicago area when he graduates? Christine wanted to know. Somehow I don't think he will. He's still too much in love with small-town life. But then again, he said this weekend that God has been teaching him a lot about surrendering his will to God's. His most fervent prayer is that he, Paul Cameron, will be God's man for the job. When do you think he'll be home again? Luke couldn't keep the wistfulness out of his voice. It seemed like forever since he had sat down and talked with his youngest brother. Silas looked apologetic as he answered, I wouldn't watch for him until sometime this summer. Further conversation was interrupted by a small cry from the direction of the bedroom. When Christine rose, Silas stopped her. Sit down, Christine. I have been waiting patiently for that sound since I walked in the door. I need to see my little Josh. Silas threw a beaming smile at Luke and Christine before moving to get his nephew. Joshua Cameron always had a smile for his Uncle Silas. Always, that is, except for today. Silas scooped him off his parents' bed to hug and kiss him hello, but Joshua just stared at the bearded face above him. Silas was not too surprised when Joshua's little arms reached for Christine as soon as he saw her. Completely unoffended, Silas headed for the piano. He played a few quick notes and then held his arms out to his nephew. Joshua's smile was his reward, and soon both were seated in their usual. Completely unoffended, Silas headed for the piano. He played a few quick notes and then held his arms out to his nephew. Joshua's smile was his reward, and soon both were seated in their usual positions on the piano bench. Completely hemmed in, Joshua was snuggled onto the piano bench with Silas's stomach at his back, the keyboard at his front, and Silas's arms stretched out on either side to reach the keys. Silas never played from sheet music while Joshua was in his lap. He watched the little hands pound the keys in front of him, or reach to the hands so much bigger than his own as they moved over the keys. If Joshua was especially tired, he would simply lay back against Silas and listen. Not so today. Fully revived from his nap, Joshua was ready to go. The remainder of the afternoon flew by as Silas settled back into his home. When Joshua had been put to bed, Silas brought up to Luke and Christine the offer from Frank Chambers. They were as stunned as he had been. Christine had to bite her tongue to keep from coming right out and telling Silas he simply couldn't go. They talked for some time, and Silas told them honestly he wasn't sure what he was supposed to do. Knowing it would be best to sleep on it and do some more thinking and praying, Silas retired early. As he lay waiting for sleep to come, he knew he wanted God's will. But if he were completely honest, he also knew he hated to leave home, even for a short time. Coming home just felt so right. He asked God before he slept if submitting to his will meant changing homes. Would it ever feel as right as this one did? The next day was Sunday, and Silas awoke looking forward to church and then lunch with the family. He wanted very much to share the news of the job offer with the rest of the family and to ask for their advice and prayers. But as it was, the subject never came up. Pastor Nolan had finished the closing prayer, but before dismissing the congregation, he spoke again. Before I dismiss you this morning, I would ask a few minutes of your time. Our niece Amy has written to us to say that my brother has broken his leg. He paused as a ripple of murmurs moved across the room. As most of you know, my brother has a farm in Neilsville where I grew up. I would ask for your prayers for Grant and Amy. A farmer's schedule does not allow for being laid up like this. I'm writing them tomorrow, and I would like to tell them you are praying. When the service was dismissed, Silas had to wait his turn to talk with the pastor. The men shook hands for a long moment before speaking, giving Silas time to see the lines of strain around the older man's eyes and mouth. "I'm sure you know why I stayed to talk with you. Would I be out of line to ask if you can share more with me than you did from the pulpit?" "It would be a relief to talk with you, Silas. Just let me see the rest of these folks out, and I'll be right with you." Silas was seated back in a pew, but within a few minutes Mrs. Nolan joined him. "Thank you for staying, Silas. You know I'll do all I can." She met his assurance with a nod, and they waited for the pastor in silence. When Pastor Nolan was finally seated, a conversation seasoned with the warmth of time began. "The letter from Amy came yesterday. She wrote that Grant fell from a ladder and broke his leg. She also writes that the doctor has given him medicine for the pain and that he's completely bedridden. They haven't even started the planting. The letter went on to say that Amy's doing all the milking and she'll be pulling money from their savings to pay for some help with the fields." Silas could hear the worry in Pastor Nolan's voice. "Where is Evan?" Silas's voice was a bit angered. "Nothing has changed with Evan. He never goes to the farm or anywhere near Grant. It's been 4 years. I have my doubts as to whether he'll ever get over Maureen's death. He's never said, but it's obvious he blames my brother for his sister's death." They sat in silence for some minutes before Silas spoke. "When you write, tell them I'm coming." "Are you sure, Silas? You've only just returned." The pastor's voice held genuine concern, but his eyes were hopeful. "I'm sure." Silas spoke in a firm voice, and in short order explained his plans and was on his way to see his family for the first time in 2 weeks, his heart a bit heavy at having to tell them he was leaving again.